in the 4th dynasty. That means the pyramid was built 2200 BC. I am born in 1675 BC, and I built the pyramid before I was born.
Good evening and welcome to For the People. No one has contributed more to our understanding and appreciation of Nile Valley civilizations than this evening's guest, Dr. Yosef Ben Yachannan. Dr. Ben Yachannan is the author of many books, among them Black Man of the Nile and His Family and African Origins of the Major Western Religions. In this segment, which was taped in the city of Waset, or today's Luxor, Egypt, Dr. Ben Yachannan discusses the contribution African religions made to Christianity and his own religion, Judaism. But first, we begin by asking Dr. Ben Yachannan about the significance of 800 Africans or African Americans journeying to Egypt.
Well, I guess anything I say will be really insufficient. Words, I guess, can't totally tell the significance for history, and everything we do is history, but the future will tell the total impact. However, what it means at this very moment, just thinking, so to speak, off the top of my head, it creates a new dimension to the Africans in the diaspora contact or recontact with his fellow African at home in Mother Africa. It signifies a new relationship between us. No longer can anyone say that the African in the Western Hemisphere is a separate African from the African at home. No longer can they talk about the African in the Western Hemisphere only related to the African of West Africa by virtue of a link of slavery. No longer can they say that the Africans of the United States, the rest of North America and South America and the islands of the Caribbean or elsewhere are not linked and interrelated to the Africans of North Africa, so-called Africans north of the Sahara. And there are a number of no longer, they can't say that they have been saying from the time the Africans were taken from all over Africa and carried either to Arabia and other points east, or to Europe, other points north, and to the United States of America and other points west. This has been a historical occasion, linking brothers with brothers, sisters with sisters, the African people back to a common motherhood, Africa.
We were at the village, the Daboud village. How did you feel about that reception?
I am probably the wrong person to ask about that, because I think my feelings probably was like a man who took crack. I have never taken it, so I gotta say probably. But for what they tell me you feel when you take crack, you're out of this world. I guess I was out of the world. Since I've never been out physically, spiritually, I was at a feeling I couldn't describe, because there was no way that I could have imagined that all of 48 villages were coming together in one main village, Daboud, to pay such respect to the African brothers and sisters for the little humble things that we were doing over the last 9-10 years.
Why is a knowledge of Egyptian or Nile Valley civilization or history so important to the reconstituting of the black mind, so important to the rebuilding of the black mind?
Well, if you're talking about Judaism and Jehovah, Jesus and Christianity, Allah and Islam, Greece and Greek philosophy. You can't speak about neither of those things without speaking about Africa and her Nile Valley and the African people, because it is Africa, and it is those African people that created even the word civilization or any meaning of that word. There is no meaning to the word civilization without the people of Africa and their descendants. You can't have Western civilization without its African root, its African people. The Pope in Rome have no meaning. The Grand Rabbi in Israel has no meaning. The Grand Mufti in Arabia has no meaning unless he is connected to his African root, that same African today who he despises. Because it is that African who built all you're going to see, and subsequently Asians and Europeans who came in to learn from him. Okay. And then subsequently become his slave master.
Specifically, what did Judaism get from the Africans?
Its entire basis. It got its most celebrated character, a man called Moshe or Moses, born right here according to Judaism. Of course, there is no Egyptian record of this, but according, let's take the Jewish Torah, or otherwise called 5 books of Moses, and in this case, particularly Exodus, the 2nd book. It speaks of Moses being born in the city of Gershom. Gershom is north of today's Cairo, which was called Fustat, but it started. They said that Moses was born about 1346 before the Common Era. That would be following the death of Amenhotep IV, who is more popularly known as Yachannan. That Moses got the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. That is folklore, Hebrew folklore, because he would not have gotten anything new. If you go across this river and the West Bank from here, in the tomb of Ramesses VI, you will see 42 laws, otherwise called the admonitions of Ma'at, or popularly the fourth negative confession, and you will find those 10 laws that Moses got allegedly from Mount Sinai, which came from about 4100 before the Common Era, meaning 2,000 years before Moses. Not only that, they said that the concept of monotheism came from the same Moses, a student of this land, the education system which was centered right up the street here, and in fact down the street here, in a place called Waset, the Grand Lodge of Waset, the Grand Temple of Waset. There's where people used to be taught for 40 years to become priests. Before that, the Grand Temple or Grand Lodge of Saqqara, which we are going to eventually. It is there, out of there came the concept of one God, Amen Ra. It was first Ra, and it was first Amen. The southerners, the southern Egyptian, call it Ra. The northern Egyptian called the force Amen. When the southern Egyptian defeated the northern Egyptian at a place called Mem Nefer, now called Memphis, it became Amen Ra. That's when Nama, the king Nama, defeated the Pharaoh, the Pharaoh Cyprus, and created the 2 gods and make one out of them, Amen Ra. Following Amen Ra, it was Amenhotep IV who unified the concept of the different aspects of the deity and make all of them into one god, which he called A-T-E-N, Aten. The Aten was shown as a sunburst with the rays. The rays was shown with a thumb at the end of each of them, the Aten, and thus Akhenaten called this God Atem, the one and only true God. And Moses wasn't born yet, much less to go to Mount Sinai.
The thumb on these rays, what does that signify?
The thumb signified the whole God holding out, or the reaching of God to his people.
Okay, you said a while ago, I think, that there are no records insofar as these temples, etc., I guess, insofar as the existence of a Moses. All right.
Except for Jewish folklore.
Okay, but are there records in the temples here?
Nothing about a Moses. Nothing about a Moses anyway in Egypt, anywhere throughout the world. There is not one iota of evidence other than the statement of the Hebrews at the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Education Center at the Sanhedrin was not before 700, before the Christian era, and that would be at least the 30th dynasty of, 700, 714 will bring us to the Ethiopian period, and that will be the 28th dynasty. So, because the Ethiopian stopped ruling here in 714, and that will be 700. The first book from of the 5 books was published.
Okay. That brings up this question. The gelling, the meshing of ancient African mythology, if you will call it, and Judeo-Christian so-called history. How do you see them meshing together? Is it a happy marriage, or do you have so many contradictions that it's impossible to believe?
It's an unhappy marriage because the bride cannot accept her background.
What do you mean?
All right, by that, the bride can't accept her racial background, but the groom persists in bragging about his. For example,
which is the groom, which is the bride?
The bride is the African, because I'm talking about the girl who come to bed but did not offer her body but was raped.
Okay.
She's a bride by force, not a bride by consent.
Okay.
The African bride was tugged from her mother. Her mother killed, her father killed, her family killed, and she was taken away and raped. And the family treasure was taken over by the ruthless groom. And the bride's family, who had to hide, was now told, anything you had is mine, and I've always been mine, even though it was yours. Let us put it more taken away out of the realm of romance.
Right.
The African who existed in history, and they say history is when a people begins to write. That starts their history. That means there is no history for Greece until Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. There is no other written record in Europe until Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Which was when?
833 before the Common Era. And Homer said in the Odyssey, quote, the gods Zeus and Apollo came from Ethiopia, unquote. Zeus and Apollo is known as Greece's first 2 gods. And Homer himself, the first Greek writer, said they came from Ethiopia. The Egyptian writer, Hunefer, Hunefer, in the papyrus of Hunefer said, quote, "We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwells at the foothills of the mountain of the moon," unquote. Secondly, when the Africans wrote and created writing, there was no God Jehovah yet, no Adam and Eve yet. The first Hebrew, Abraham, was not born. Abraham is not born until at best 1346 before the Common Era in the city of Ur in Chaldea. Chaldea is about where modern day Iraq, just south of it is, where the Tigris and Euphrates meet. Now, when Abraham was born is equivalent to the 13th dynasty, just around the time when a people called the Shepherd Kings, or Hyksos, invaded the northern part of this land, around the delta. And they did not come any further south than a place called Avris. And they're still in the delta. For instance, Hyksos have never been this far. They have never been as far as Cairo. And Cairo is an old city. The oldest it could go back in Fustat. And it was made by the conquerors during the time of Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali wasn't even an Arab. He was an Albanian who took on the name Muhammad Ali. Now, when he converted to Islam to get the throne. If we go back further, not a single Hebrew was in this land until then, unless he was astray. There was a single nation. There was nobody named Abraham. Abraham's mother and father did not follow what we call Judaism today. Terah, his father, worshipped an African woman. An African woman you will see right across here, called Hathor. H-A-T-H-A-O, that's the Western spelling. The correct name is Het Heru, H-E-T-H-E-R-O. You will see her and the funerary temple of Queen Makari Hatshepsut. She is sewn as a cow. And when she is sewn as a woman, it's an African woman with cow's ears. The best place you will see her is at a temple dedicated solely to her at a place called Dendera. Then you will see thousands of faces of her, especially in the hall. The Hebrews in the first book, the book called Genesis, which means first, they showed that Abraham worshipped the golden calf. India calling the sacred cow. But the golden calf is nothing else but goddess Hathor. Now, that's the 13th dynasty. If we go back to find out all that was done by the time of the 13th dynasty here, before the first Asian, there is no European history then. The Etruscans, the first of European, along with the people of Pyrrhus, which later became the Romans and the Greeks, are not in history then. That don't say they don't exist, but there are no records of them. There's no record of an Adam or an Eve. Then no God, no Jehovah, no Jesus, no Allah. Then.
But the Africans were already...
but African got Ptah. I go in at random. I could keep knock them off. Let me go. Since African God had goddesses, I mean, they weren't eunuchs or anything like that. So the Africans had Ptah, right? They had Nut. They had Osiris. They had Isis. And by the way, I could use the proper name. When I say Osiris, they had Asaru. When I say Isis, they had Aset. They had his son, the Trinity. They had Asaru's son, Heru or Horus, born of an immaculate concepted mother. He himself born of a virgin birth, which you can see the story at the temple of Scetv at a place called Abydos. And Scetv was a king, a 19th dynasty king. The Africans equally had numerous other goddesses and gods.
I wanted to ask this question later on, but I think now's a good time. You have often spoken of the fact that many times you hear people say that the Jews built pyramids, the pyramids in Egypt. Would you expound on that, please?
If you could build a pyramid before you're born, you're more than God. Because even God have never done anything before God existed. You know? Mm-hmm. When they said God created the world, first they tell us God come into being by God's self. So God got to be here to do something here. All right. The pyramids of Egypt, there are 72 total. They're around the central part of Egypt in today's geography. Those pyramids that mostly certain Jewish people go and stand on, such as Mayor Koch came and Begin, Prime Minister Begin came and stood on, that particular pyramid is the one of Khufu, whom Herodotus later came and called Cheops. That pyramid was built in the 4th dynasty. The first Jew, Abraham, wasn't born until the 13th dynasty. If I was born in the 13th dynasty, how could I build a pyramid in the 4th dynasty? That means the pyramid was built 2200 BC. I am born in 1675 BC, and I built the pyramid before I was born? It's nonsense. One has to understand, in every religion, there is a mythology, there is a basic concept on which all religion begin, a statement of existence. And generally, it starts with a statement of the first existence coming from the people who has this religious thought. All based in the folklore of the people. They do not give credit to the source from whence they came. All right. So when you talk about the Hebrews and anyhow dealing with the pyramids, it starts out when they were enslaved. There is no record any place in the world, not only here, all the stolen artifacts taken out of Egypt and other places of Africa that shows the Hebrews being enslaved here. The first statement of this is supposed to have taken place at least 800 years after they were supposedly slaves in Egypt. There is no record any place in Egypt of a Moses, of a Joseph, none whatever, none. There is no record of the Red Sea, the water coming back into the Indian Ocean. None whatsoever. No nation on the west side of the Red Sea and the east side of the Red Sea have any record of any flood ever having taken place before the Common Era. There is no Red Sea where the place they're supposed to leave from due exactly east, a place called Ramesses. It just by chance the question came when I'm doing a thing. This come from the New York, the Washington Post, Sunday, April the 12th, 1987, page D1. And if the Post have spoken, God has spoken. It's an article called Searching for Signs of the Exodus by Horchel Shanks. And it goes down, but I just say, this noted biblical archaeologist, the world-reputed scholar, Dr. Divas, stated, quote, there was no real Exodus, period. There was no real wilderness wandering, comma, as such William G. Dever, excavator of the ancient biblical city of Giza between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and former director of the Albright School of Archaeology and Research in Jerusalem. The world's most noted authority on biblical archaeology said it's only a statement without any fact whatsoever.
Now, what do you think that means, that statement? What do you think that statement means for Africans around the world?
What it means is that we're going to have to stop saying, go down Moses, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. In the first place, we have to realize that it is an anti-African song, sung by Africans who didn't even know what they were singing about. In the second place, the character that they're singing about has nothing to do. We got to call Harriet Tubman a great African woman instead of the black Moses. If there was a Moses, what else could he have been? If he was born here, African parents, went to school here, got all his education here, he leave here when he's 85 years old, the first time he ever went anyplace else. You see, it means that we have to rethink. If Moses is a hoax and the Exodus is a hoax, which they are, then we got to examine Genesis as its hoax. There are parts of the Bible that are historical, and there are parts that just fairy tale.
If it's a hoax, why was the hoax perpetrated?
The hoax was perpetrated by a people who wanted that identification and had none, and had to take other people's history, distorted to suit themselves, to give themselves an identification.